everybody, my name is Mr. Gomez and today we are going to be talking about rhythm. Now rhythm is something that exists everywhere. It's the way that you walk, it's the way that your heart beats, it's the way that you breathe. But today we're going to be talking about rhythm in terms of music fundamentals. Now there's a lot of elements that make up a song, but there's two basic building blocks that make up all of the music that we listen to, and those are rhythm and melody. Beyond that, there's harmony and there's syncopation and there's technique, but we don't need to talk about all that. The most basic building blocks that we use are rhythm and melody. Rhythm tells us when to play and melody tells us what to play. Now today we're just going to talk about rhythm. So let's make ourselves a little timeline, okay? I'm just going to draw a straight line going from way over here to way over here. And just like when we read a book, we're going to read from left to right. Over here I'm going to draw a little symbol called the treble clef. It's not super important to us right now, but it helps our eye understand that this is where we're beginning. Now, we can't talk about rhythm without first talking about time signature. So, there's lots of different types of time signatures that we could use, but the one that we're going to use today is called 4/4. Now, time signature is just something that helps us organize all the beats into a pattern, okay? So, along with our time signature, which I'm going to explain in a second, I'm going to draw some lines. So let's say that we have this much space to work with, and I'm going to put a line here, okay? And then a little bit more, and then I'll put another one here, and a little bit more, and I'll put the last one here, and I'm going to make the line just a little bit longer. Now, what am I doing? I'm making something called measures, or bars, okay? It means the same thing. And in each one of these, we're going to be able to fit 4 beats. 4/4 is the time signature that we're using because it's the most common time signature. Most of the music that you listen to on the radio, most of the music that you like, or most of the music that's out there is in 4/4 time. In fact, it's so common that sometimes when you're reading a piece of music, you might not even see the numbers 4/4. You might see it written like this. A C, which stands for common time because it's the most common time. Okay? So, what we're going to do is we're going to set this up, and by the way, this is not how you would actually write music. You would write the clef, and then a time signature, and the key signature, and then you would write out 5 lines. We don't need to do all that since we're just talking about rhythm, okay? So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw the beats under each one. Now, if we're in 4/4, that means that there's going to be 4 beats in every measure. So let's draw those in, okay? Right underneath here, I'm going to draw 1, 2, 3, 4. So it might be a little bit hard to see, but there I basically just drew the numbers 1 through 4 in each measure. Here's our first measure, second measure, third measure, fourth measure, okay? And we're using 4 just to make it even. But there's 4 beats because we're in 4/4 time, and that's what that tells us. It tells us that there's going to be 4 beats in every single measure. So, just like when we're reading, we read from left to right, okay? So, let's say we're going to count our beats at this tempo. Tempo means how fast we're going to go, okay? So this is our beats, and all we got to do is we're going to count to 4 in that rhythm, okay? So you can do it with me. 1, 2, ready, and 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Easy, right? If you found that super simple and kindergarten, that's because your body already knows what rhythm is. It already has a sense of rhythm. What we're doing now is we're just getting your brain to understand how it works. So in order to make a piece of music, we need to use these little symbols called notes that are going to tell us how long each of those notes is going to last over the course of these beats. So there's lots of different kinds. There's this one, there's this one, there's this one where it's like the same thing but colored in. There's this one where we color it in and there's a little flag. And then there's more and more and more, okay? For right now though, we're just gonna focus on this one, which is the most important one. It's colored in and it has a little stem. This is called a quarter note. I don't have the best handwriting, please don't make fun of me. So, a quarter note. Why is it the most important one? Well, because it's worth 1 beat. So most of the time signatures that we're gonna use, or that you would use, are gonna have a 4 on the bottom, meaning that it uses a quarter note as its basis for how we're going to count the beats. If a quarter note is worth 1 beat, then in order to fill up this whole thing with quarter notes, we would just put 1 quarter note on every beat. So now we have a quarter note on every single beat. We just filled up the entire 4 measures with nothing but quarter notes. Okay? So if we were to use our hands as an instrument and we wanted to play this piece of music, it would sound like this. Ready? 1, 2, 1, 2, starting right here. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, stop. So it's the exact same thing as counting the beats, because all we did is we threw quarter notes onto every measure. But obviously, not every piece of music is going to use nothing but quarter notes to make up its song. Sometimes you want the note to last for longer. So that's where this comes in. Okay? This right here, it looks just the same, except instead of coloring it in, we leave it not colored in, and it's called a half note. We call it a half note because it lasts for half a measure. Half a measure is how many beats? 1, 2. What's half of 4? 2. So it lasts for half a measure. So if we want to fill up the whole thing with half notes, then we got to put 1 half note every other beat. So we're going to put one on 1, skip the next one because it lasts for 2 beats, and then we're going to put another one on 3. So let's see what this sounds like. If we're only going to play on every 1 and 3, then our notes are going to last a little bit longer than they did before with the quarter note, okay? So let's play it all the way through. Ready? 1, 2, ready, and 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Stop. And if you're following along at home, what I want you to do is every time that we play along, you got to start reading from right here all the way to the end and never take your eyes off the music. That's very important. Now, what if we want our notes to last for even longer? The biggest kind of note that we can have is this one right here, okay? It's basically just a little circle, and we call it a whole note. It's called a whole note because it lasts for a whole measure, okay? It lasts for an entire 4 beats. So what we're going to do in order to fill up the whole thing, just like we did with the other notes, is we're going to put 1 at the beginning of every measure. So it's only going to land on the number 1. Okay, I'm going to put 1 on the first one, on the second one, on the third one, and on the fourth one, getting us a total of 4 because there's 4 measures. For every 1 measure, we get 1 whole note because a whole note lasts for a whole measure. So we're not just trying to figure out how long it's going to take us to get from one note to the next one. We also want to know how long we need to hold that note. In this case, we're going to hold each note for a whole 4 beats before we play the next one, okay? So if we were to do that on a keyboard, it would sound like this. Ready? 1, 2, 1, 2, ready, and 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, and stop. So notice I held down the key for an entire 4 beats every time I played it. And every time I played it on the 1. Now just to recap, a whole note is worth 4 beats, half note is worth 2 beats, and a quarter note is worth 1 beat. You might think that's where it stops since we only have 4 beats to work with. But if we want to play even faster, then we can play in between the beats, okay? That's where this note comes in. This is called an eighth note. It looks just like a quarter note, except you draw a little flag at the top, okay? An eighth note is worth half a beat, okay? So whereas before we were counting 1 through 4, now we have to count in between. So let's fill up the whole thing with eighth notes, and then we'll figure out how we're going to say it. So now we have the whole thing filled up with eighth notes. And you might notice that these look a little bit different from the note that I drew down here. And that's because this is how you represent an eighth note by itself. But when we draw them next to each other, in order to make it easier to read, we put them together in groupings, okay? So in this case, since we're filling the whole thing up, I decided to group them into groups of 4. But you can also group them into groups of 2, and into groups of 3 if you're doing triplets, but we're not talking about triplets right now, okay? So these are in groups of 4. We have 4 here, 4 here, 4 here, 4 here. Why 4? Because we're counting in between the beats, okay? So imagine all the beats are your fingers, okay? But except for your thumb. Pretend you don't have a thumb, and you're counting all your fingers, and that's a beat, okay? So 1, 2, 3, 4. Those are all 4 of your beats. But now we're using eighth notes that only last half a beat. So now you got to count the spaces in between your fingers. So you're counting 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and we count the side of our hand. So in order to say this out loud, which is called rhythmic solfege, we need to add a little word to represent the beat that's in between, okay? So I'm just going to draw an ampersand, and we're going to say and every time we're in between, basically after every number. Okay, so now we have our beats and our beats in between, and we have all of our eighth notes filling up every single measure, okay? Get your hands ready and follow along at home. Ready? 1, 2, 1, 2, ready, and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 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 and. Now that's a little bit harder to follow because it goes a little bit faster. But as long as you're counting in those groups of 4, then you're fine. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and just like that. And you never take your eyes off the music. So if you understand everything that I just said, then great, we can move on. But if you're still having some trouble, because I know it's a little bit confusing sometimes, go back and rewatch some parts of the video in order to get a better understanding of how each note works, okay? But for the most part, like I said, a whole note is worth 4 beats. Half note is worth 2 beats, quarter note is worth 1 beat, and an eighth note is half a beat. And so far, we've been filling up every single measure with just one kind of note. But now let's see what happens when we mix those notes up, which is what happens in a real piece of music. You create patterns using all these different notes as your building blocks. So in our first measure, we're going to keep it simple and just put 4 quarter notes in every beat, okay? Real simple. It sounds like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's the first measure. In our second measure, we have 2 half notes, which is the most amount of half notes that we can have in a measure. So now from here it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. In our third measure, things get a little bit weird because now we have 2 kinds of notes in one measure, which we're allowed to do. We have 4 eighth notes and 2 quarter notes, okay? So this would read like this. It would read 1 and 2 and 3, 4. Right? 1 and 2 and 3, 4. Or you could count every single beat, which is what we're going to do in a second, okay? So, up until now, let's count it using the beats in between, just because when we get to eighth notes, that way we don't have to switch what we're saying, okay? So, the whole thing would read like this. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. And in our last measure, we're just going to use a simple whole note to end the whole thing out, which is something common that you would see in a piece of music, just a solid whole note, okay? So now the whole thing together would read like this. Ready? Follow along with me. 1, 2, ready, and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 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 and stop. So now that you understand how all the basic notes in rhythm work together and how they work individually, I encourage you to write something out like this at home and mix them up. Maybe you can put 2 half notes over here and then fill this one up with quarter notes and put maybe 2 eighth notes and then some quarter notes, some half notes, end it with a whole note, start it with a whole note, however you want. That's your piece of music and you can make it any way you want. There's no wrong way as long as you follow the structure and the rules of music fundamentals. And if you're still struggling to understand how each one works, just go back and rewatch the different parts where I explained how the different notes work, and then move forward and you'll have a better understanding of how all those notes work together. Also, what I encourage you to do is take a listen to all the music that you listen to normally, or the music that your parents are listening to, the music that's on the radio, and using what you learned here, try to pick up on the patterns that are happening in that song. Are they using eighth notes? Are they using quarter notes? Are they using 4/4 time signature, which, like I said, is the most common time? So pretty much with any song, you could throw it on and you could start counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, to pretty much any song. And then from there, you can start figuring out what kind of notes that they're using in the song. Because like I said, these are the basic building blocks that make up all the music that you hear. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching. Keep practicing and never stop learning.